Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Here we are again. Hi. Hi, everyone. Let me send a message to my interlocutor. Hi, everyone. Yeah, another day during a genocide, right? Not everyone is as able to compartmentalize that as I am, and good for them. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Jasper.
Here I am.
Hey, man. Not
What's up?
too much.
Is this gonna show up as my live too? Like, will my followers be able to see it? Or do I
Yes,
have
they
to?
will. They will right now, and then when we're done, if you accept my collaboration request, then it'll in perpetuity belong to both
Okay,
of us.
I'm gonna strongly consider that. So we'll see.
Good. Don't do anything that isn't authentic for you. Yeah.
Of course.
I'm just trying to figure out what celebrity you look like. I know which celebrity I look like.
Oh,
But there's an actor. It's not Jake Gyllenhaal, but it's like, or maybe it is, but it's like one of those guys. Anyway, he's very handsome.
oh, thank you. I used to get Jake Gyllenhaal in high school, and then um, for a while it was Brendan Fraser, which I was not a huge fan of.
Right.
Yeah, it's changed over the years. What about who do you get? I'm trying to figure it out.
Robert Downey Jr.
Oh my God, yeah, that's who I've been thinking you are for the last month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if only he was doing what I'm doing, it would have much more reach.
That is true.
Yeah.
I,
Jared Leto, I can see that. Yeah. Someone said, now I've got everyone in the chat. But let's talk about things that are a little more substantial, shall we?
let's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, if you wouldn't mind starting by introducing yourself while I go do something I didn't have a chance to do just before this, which will distract me, and the people know exactly what that is because I'm always doing it.
Okay,
It's
I
be,
will. Yeah.
it's be, it's being.
Oh, got
I'll be right
it.
back.
Yeah, just make sure you go on mute. Um, yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Jasper. I'm in Brooklyn. I think Daniel's in Brooklyn too. Let's see. I'm a writer, and I've always been, not always, for I'd say 5, 6 years, I've been pretty involved in the sort of Jewish anti-Zionist movement, um, mostly as a participant in activist stuff. I never like led any protests or held leadership positions or anything like that, but it's just been an issue I've cared about for a long time, and I've been writing for a while too. And to make a long story short, in the weeks and months after October 7th, I was just so like in the thick of it, going to protests all the time, writing about it, getting in arguments about it. It was just so much, and I felt like I was sort of losing my grounding on what the issue was even about. And so I decided, I think that I actually just need to like get closer to it to get my own clarity and my separate my reality from the biases that I had beforehand. So basically, at the end of December, I just booked a trip into Tel Aviv. From Tel Aviv, I spent a few days there, and then I went into the West Bank through Bethlehem, and then I spent the next couple of weeks traveling around the West Bank, meeting with activists and normal people, shepherds, all different types of people, both trying to, get a sense of what life under the occupation is like, and in some cases going right into the sort of diciest areas like Jenin refugee camp, among others, but also just trying to like live with the Palestinians for a while and just see what they're like, and even in times of war. And yeah, I mean, we'll get into this, but I was just gobsmacked on. I mean, I knew it was bad there, and like I said, I've been following this for a long time, but nothing could have prepared me for the pervasiveness of the cruelty that I saw in the West Bank, and that sort of right alongside the just incredibly warm and obviously resilient spirit of the Palestinian people. And I should clarify, like, as I've said, I was not walking around with a yellow star pinned to my shirt, but I was telling people I was Jewish, and I did not get 1 ounce of hostility from the Palestinians. I got a lot of hostility from Israeli Jews in the West Bank. And so anyway, when I got home like 2 weeks ago, I was just sort of like, I, I honestly think that most people have no idea what's going on here, because I was pretty well educated on it. And it feels, this has been like sort of the worst part of this realization, is knowing that like Palestinian people have been shouting about this forever. Um, and I was trying to pay attention and I was reading about it, but I still there was something essential about it that I was missing, that I had to go and experience for myself. So after that, I just decided like I'm going to dedicate myself to trying to capture that that like ineffable thing that I saw there, that I feel like if everybody understood, there would not be a reasonable person in the world who could support this. It's just completely morally indefensible. And then when you reach back into history and you see how the history of the state of Israel, it's built on this. I mean, there is no Israel without this. Then that takes you down some more challenging paths, where it's not just a matter of, oh, this is a bad thing that's happening. It's like, what are the implications of making this bad thing stop happening? And so anyway, I think that all eyes are on Gaza for good reason. There's a genocide happening there, but I also am like sort of jumping up and down, waving my arms, saying, guys, look over here. It's really bad and it's getting worse. And I think, number one, if you understood just how violent the occupation was and the ethnic cleansing, I think that it would clarify a lot of what's happening in Gaza. Like, I think there's a lot of people who think, yeah, it's really bad in Gaza, but like they're not actually targeting schools. Like, they're not trying to do this and that. And it's like, when you see what they're doing in the West Bank, it's very clear, like, oh no, they are. They're targeting specific people, specific institutions. And then the other thing is that the West Bank is like a pressure cooker right now. I mean, we're not that far removed from the last Intifada, and the level of violence there is as high as I believe it's as high as it's been since then. And I'm really worried that it just could explode, and there's another front to this war. There already is, but I'm worried about an even bigger activation there. And a lot of people that I talk to are worried about that too. So anyway, my sort of life mission right now is to help people see what's going on in the West Bank, but to clarify the state of Israel, its history, what they're doing in Gaza, and all that. Oh, I can't hear you, Daniel. I think you're on mute.
That's right. Thank you. First, I just salute you for making the choice to do that. Even realizing you have biases is something that's extraordinary, actually. And it's extraordinary in any area of life. I work with people. I do a thing I call mental chiropractic, where I take walks with people and help them get unstuck. And it's always about uncovering the things they didn't know, which is to say that prejudices, not racial prejudice ever, but prejudgments of things they've decided that and then it just fades into the background. It becomes the wallpaper of your life. You don't notice it.
Yeah.
And so much more in the political realm. And it sounds like you had pretty good anti-Zionist politics before you went, so you could have, as many of us do. I mean, relatively speaking, right?
I mean, honestly, I mean, yeah, definitely relatively speaking, but I was not. I wasn't honestly. I don't know that I was openly just saying I'm anti-Zionist,
Okay. But
and frankly,
frankly,
that's most.
yeah, I don't care about that term. Like
Yeah.
I don't identify as it just happens to be that I'm against the thing called Zionism. So it's like a good
But
term. But
I also I felt that way, and then and honestly, like I actually went in thinking my view will become more nuanced and things will become less straightforward. And like, people don't believe me about this. So what I'll say is like, go back in my Substack, read my writing from East Africa, where I went in with certain preconceived notions and then they were sort of blown up. In this case, I actually did go in thinking I'm probably going to see some things that I really don't like in the West Bank, and I probably will see more things that I do like in Israel and blah, blah, blah. And maybe it'll muddle things. But I actually came out of it. It was just the opposite. It was like everything became very clear. And so I don't really care about the terms too. I think they mostly just alienate
yeah,
people and just get in the way. But in terms of like the level of nuance, I mean, sure, my view is more nuanced, but things are a lot more clear now than they were a month ago before I
mm,
went.
right. Well, so wherever you started from, just the willingness to risk being wrong is huge. Now, someone asked a question in the chat, said, Daniel, have you ever been to the West Bank? And I'm ashamed to say no, except I went to a settlement once as part of an educational program. And we knew that the settlers were the bad guys, but we still hung out with them and watched their propaganda video about their settlement and their underground bunker. And then I worked for B'Tselem
Oh,
I
cool.
didn't work for them. I volunteered for them for a
Huh.
few days. And they encouraged me to take a bus ride to see the Palestinian villages this is in 93, 94. And it's
Mhm.
incredible. And that's the only time I've ever been to that land. Um, the depth of the prejudice suggested to me that I could feel sympathetic for the Palestinians from a distance,
Yeah.
see the inequality, get it conceptually, and then be against it, but still within the framework of a kind of Jewish chauvinist. Like, it would be absurd if you were a freedom writer in the South and you don't go have like soul food with, or go to church with a black family, or even just meet anyone black.
Mhm.
Just absurd. You can't know a people. So, and at this point, ever since then, I'm like, I'm never going back to that country.
Yeah.
But the fact is, that's not even an excuse, because if I wanted to go to the West Bank, I could go to Jordan first and then come in over that crossing. You know, so I think that's unfinished business. My dad and my brother have both been, and they've been to Gaza too,
Hmm.
and they likewise said the only time they felt unsafe as a Jew was from Israeli soldiers.
And that's not even close. And like, I can't go into details, but I met people who, a lot of people here would think that, oh, those are the people that want to kill you. And I mean, couldn't have been further from the truth. And I mean, I had guns pointed at my face multiple times by, like, a lot of these soldiers are like 18, 19, 20 years old. And like, they shoot. Like, they're very casual about shooting people. I mean, to be fair, they shoot Palestinians for the most part, but um, it's there's a lot more to say about that. I do want to actually just say one thing about the settlers, though. Um, in hindsight, I wish that before I'd gone, I had reached out to some settlements to try to set up some meetings. Now I think it's probably too late, just because like they'll look me up and see that I am biased. But so when I was in the West Bank, I wanted to try to talk to some settlers, and I had a few different options. One of them was like try to walk up to a settlement, and everybody was like, "You'll get shot. You will probably die if you try to do that." So I didn't do that. The other one was to try to go. Actually, it doesn't matter. There was no viable way to do it. But I kept on asking this same question for my first like week or two there, especially in the places like Hebron where the settlement is literally like in the city. I would ask Palestinians, "Have you ever had a positive interaction with the settlers?" And I was coming at it from a perspective of like, yes, you're enemies. You hate each other, you fight over land, but you're also neighbors. Maybe one day they'd ring your doorbell and they're like, hey, I ran out of sugar or something. And every time I asked that question, I would get laughed at. And finally, somebody explained it to me that if a settler was to be nice to me, they would fundamentally not be doing their duty as a settler. They're not here just because they think it's a nice place to live. There's plenty of nice places to live within the 48 boundaries. They're here because they have some messianic nationalistic duty in their minds to be there to try to get all of what they call Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. And so they're there to torment the Palestinians. It's not like the harassment is just a result of people who don't like each other. That's literally their job there. And that was another thing that it was not so clear to me beforehand just how much it's like the settler movement it's a political movement sort of at its core. And yeah, so anyway, I could not find anybody who'd had a positive interaction with a settler. There were some people who said, yeah, I've had a friendly exchange with a soldier every now and then, which is extremely rare. But in terms of the settlers, never.
Yeah, well,
and the soldiers, for the most part, are absolutely not friendly. But I just want to clarify that.
sure, but I mean that's typical, even in a city with police brutality,
Yeah.
it's not unthinkable that a cop would play soccer with, even a racist cop would play soccer with some black kids and kind of enjoy himself, and they would have fun, But it's a very tenuous kind of game. What was I going to say? Yeah. So do you want to just, I mean, at this point, you're just a repository of experiences that I haven't had
Yeah.
and story. I'm sure you have so many stories to tell. I feel
Yeah.
like maybe the best thing I can do here is to shut up and just let you
Sure.
just share what you saw.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm sorry for the plug, but I'm sharing a lot of stories on my Substack. So if you go to my Instagram page and click on the link, just subscribe to my newsletter because that's where I'm putting the stories out. But yeah, let me give you a few. So right now I'm writing about this town called Sebastia, which is a town that very few people that I've talked to have ever heard of, which is a little surprising because it's a town that's built around an ancient archaeological site, the oldest archaeological site in the West Bank, one of the oldest in all of that whole region. And because of that, Israel has always had a particular interest in this town because they view archaeology as one of the tools they have to prove their biblical roots on the land. And so this town has been under a violent siege since 1967, basically. And
Okay. Missed you you went out for a second, but you're back.
So the article I'm writing a 3-part series, and I'll just explain that because I think that'll clarify. So it's a town of 3,200 people. It's a beautiful town. It's surrounded by agricultural land, olive trees, apricot trees, almond trees, and then there's this incredible archaeological site right in the center of town. Massive limestone structures just shooting out of the ground from like 4,000 years ago. It goes back to the Iron Age. And but the Palestinians are not allowed to touch it. They are not allowed to touch any of the site because it sits within Area C of the West Bank. Now, I don't, unless you tell me otherwise, like I don't know that I should go into an Oslo Accord explainer.
No, I'll just sum it up. I was in Israel during the Oslo Accords,
Okay.
which is famously termed, when the peace process. But as Ibrat Said said, it was all process and no peace, because instead of immediately agreeing to and adhering to the international consensus, UN Resolution 242 from 1971 or whatever it was, maybe even earlier than that, that it's 2 states, East Jerusalem as the shared capital, West Bank and Gaza as the state. What it did was it divided the West Bank up into these different areas with basically different zoning permits. Jews here, Palestinians here, and of course, it's no coincidence that the best water and the best resources, the best fertile land are going to be. And of course, it wasn't just like splitting it down the middle. These circuitous lines. If you look at the map, it's incredible. So the Palestinians live in the holes of a Swiss cheese map, basically. and that's what's called cantons or Bantustans, and those come from the South African model of limited sovereignty, for the occupied majority of people. So you're talking about navigating a territory that's been chopped up um, beyond all recognition and beyond all coherence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in Sebastia, and also I should just add that there's like the idea of it. First of all, Israel was not actually given any land in the Oslo Accords. They were given administrative and security rights on parts of the land, but so all settlements continued to be illegal. Every settlement in the West Bank is illegal under international law.
You know who
And
started the settlement movement?
who?
The Labor Party.
Oh
The
yeah, yeah.
Golda Meir's Labor Party moved way more settlers into the West Bank than the Likud governments did, the right wingers.
Right.
So that tells you all you need to know about liberal Zionism.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. And I wrote about that in my last piece. But anyway, the point I'm making is that there are these zones A, B, and C, and in theory they determine who gets to administer like civil things and security. But the reality is the occupation rules everything. But in Sebastia, the lines are drawn very carefully around the archaeological site to ensure that Palestinians are not allowed to touch it. And so what you have here is a team of there's like historians and archaeologists and scientists who are desperate to work on the site. I mean, these are academic people. They want to continue unearthing artifacts and research it. And the irony is that the people that I talk to there are not in denial that the roots are mixed. I mean, they showed that there were absolutely Jewish people there. And of course, there were Palestinian people there, and there were lots of people there. I mean, this was like the ancient land of Samaria. And so the Palestinians there are not trying to prove like exclusive roots here. They're just like, can we please work on it? This is like the treasure of our town, and they're not allowed to touch it. If they touch it, they could be killed for it. And they're also not allowed to maintain it. So literally this morning, there's been a rainstorm the last few days there, and a giant Roman column just collapsed, which is like devastating for this community. I mean, what I said today is that to me is like a perfect metaphor for sort of what's happening in what's happening in Gaza is, there's a genocide happening, and a cultural genocide. They are actively targeting cultural institutions and religious centers and whatnot and blowing them up. And in the West Bank, that's happening too, just much more slowly. So like they haven't let them maintain the site for decades, and so it falls apart, right? The rock just starts to degrade. So anyway, one of the pieces I'm writing is about the way they've tried to sort of steal this town's history by forbidding them from using the archaeological site, and they've done their own research there, the settlers have. The second part is about actually it's the first part, but it's about the like systematic way, incredibly diligent, thorough, systematic way that the settlers and soldiers keep tabs on the town's municipal agenda and just dismantle it at every turn. So just to give you two quick examples, I met with the mayor while I was there, and then we've had a couple follow-up calls. And on one of the calls, I think last week, it was like, let me tell you what happened yesterday. And basically there was a huge rainstorm coming. So he sends out the town bulldozer to clear the water channels. If you don't clear the debris out of the water channels, then the streets will flood, it'll destroy property. This is a thing that happens in towns all around the world that people, for the most part, don't know happens because it's just so basic. But it's part of just maintaining a town that has water. So they send out the bulldozer. Within a few minutes, a squad of Israeli soldiers show up, guns drawn, arrest the bulldozer driver, confiscate the bulldozer. They don't get to clear the debris. The streets flood, property's destroyed, and just like that, the town is a wreck for some time. And that is just like something that happened impromptu one day. There's also they raised $15 million from a German development bank to build a new irrigation system where they'd be able to transfer water directly from a water treatment plant to agricultural land. They let them finish. They built the entire thing, spent $15 million, took months and months and months, and then right as it was about to be finished, Israeli soldiers showed up, poured cement into the system, just destroyed it. And when they don't have to give a justification, but when they are pushed to, they just vaguely sort of nod to like security.
It's funny.
And so this is like,
It's like the Palestinians raised it, RAIS, and Israel raised it, RAZ.
yeah, no, for sure. And then, and that, that's two examples. Like it just goes on and on and on. And again, like you sort of have to be in awe at just how diligent they are about trying to destroy every aspect of life in this town. And then there's the last story I'm telling from there is about this 18-year-old named Fauzi, who in July, so before the war started, was murdered by Israeli soldiers. To make a long story short, he was driving with a friend, um, and and by the way, this town does not even have armed resistance. So like, there's no fighters in this town. Soldiers showed up, Israeli soldiers, and put 100 bullets into the car, 40 of them into Fauzi. He was shot in the head, face, neck, all over his body, and he was killed, of course. The soldiers left his body on the street, arrested the other kid in the car who had also been hit, dragged him off to jail, and it's just like torn the community to pieces. And it's still hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that there is literally no recourse. So like, I met with the whole family while I was there, and I was like, well, who do you call? Like, your son was murdered. Who do you call? And they were trying to explain to me, like, there's nobody to call. Like, the people you would call are the ones who killed him. And so there not only is there no recourse, but I mean, they tried to frame him. They said in the newspaper that it was an attempted car ramming, so they tried to call him a terrorist. They tried to smear him and his whole family. They never presented a shred of evidence because it was just not true.
Yeah.
And
Everyone
anyway,
knows, everyone knows the way to stop a car that's about to ram something is to just pump lead into the driver so that he slumps forward, his foot goes on the gas, as opposed to fucking take out the wheels.
yeah. And actually, after the car came to a stop, they kept shooting.
Yeah,
And
of course.
so they don't even need a plausible
No.
explanation, which is what's like, what helps you understand it is it's like, oh, they don't even have to pretend to have a story. And actually, what they said to the friend after he got let out of jail 9 days later, when he asked, like, why did you do this? They said to him, or the commanding officer said, oops. So that is the closest thing the family's got into why did you kill our son is oops. And so anyway, the reason I am talking about this town, Sebastia, is because like those three things, the trying to steal the history of the town, trying to destroy daily life there, and then actually just murdering with impunity is a really good sort of microcosm for what the occupation is doing throughout the entire West Bank. And just to like, I cannot, I honestly lost track of how many people I met that had been shot, or their child had been shot, or a friend had been shot. And like, they all had receipts. They showed me their scars. They showed me medical records. I went up to a village called Al Tuwani up in Masafer Yatta, which people may have heard of because it's in the Hebron Hills, and it's been a shepherding community that's like under constant siege from settlers. The day I went up there, just by pure coincidence, was the day that a guy named Zachariah was coming home from the hospital. He had just spent 2 months in the hospital, I think, from being shot in the stomach by a settler. There's a video on the internet if you look up Al Tuwani shooting. But anyway, I was interviewing him. I was talking to him, and this guy, he's still dealing with a lot of medical stuff. He has like, his guts are taped to his side. He has to go back for more surgeries. He has newborn twins, 4 kids total. I'm sitting there talking to him and his little children. As we're talking, they're shouting outside, and we look outside, and the settlers have shown up. These same, from the same settlement that shot him, are just outside with their guns, just yelling, tormenting, scaring the sheep. And they had soldiers with them. They had an armed guard with them. They were armed, and then they had an armed guard with them. And by the way, the settlers are also armed and dressed like military now because the government gave them that stuff. So it's like this guy who was nearly murdered, who has 4 young kids, including 2 babies, is still living in a village where his attempted murderer can still come anytime and does come anytime to torment them. And again, it's like, so there's got to be somebody to call to say, hey, the guy who tried to kill me is outside my door again. And the people that you would call are there with them. Are there? And I saw it. I was there. One of them pointed a gun at my head. Like, it's just, it is the most. So this is the kind of thing I'm saying when it's like, I couldn't wrap my mind around just how bad it was. And like, there were so many instances where something like that happened.
It's unthinkable, isn't it? I mean, you need to go to a place like Kafka.
Yeah.
You need to get into a fiction world where no recourse is available to you, and the rules are designed to drive you crazy, even if they don't kill you. And of course, what most people don't know, or a lot of people don't know, is the victim of that crime and the perpetrator of that crime exist under two different legal systems, completely different legal systems. So if, as sometimes, I mean, very seldom, very, very seldom happens, a settler is brought to justice for something that the Israeli press can't ignore, or, just for pure appearances, they'll be tried in civil court or
Yeah, and there's
Israeli criminal court, and whereas a Palestinian is tried in military court.
yeah, and I would encourage everybody to after this to look up administrative detention if you don't already know what it is. It's basically the way they can just arrest any Palestinian with no charge, hold them for 6 months, and then after 6 months they can actually just keep re-upping it. So there's currently 10,000. There's 10,000 Palestinians in detention, and I want to say 6,000 of them. It's either 3 or 6,000, so don't hold me to it, are under administrative detention, meaning there's no charge that they have that they've been able to see, and so
Children.
including children. And so
And what this is kidnapping and hostage taking.
Yeah.
Except there's no ransom. The ransom is stop existing. At least Hamas, whatever you want to say about them, they have some clear demands, which is the release of those administratively detained prisoners.
Yeah, and a lot of people have asked me, like, how do you know they're not just telling you what you want to hear? About there being no armed resistance in Sebastia, or about this or that. And what I'll say is, or about the fact that like these detainees are innocent. And I mean, the basic answer to that is that, as I'm sure most people know, for the most part, I can't speak for everybody, of course, but for the people that I met in the West Bank, like, there's no shame about armed resistance there. I mean, resistance is obviously central to the Palestinian identity, and armed resistance as well. And so there'd be no reason to say, oh, that kid didn't do anything, like they just detained him. Like they will say, like, oh, no, he was a fighter, or, he attempted to, stab a soldier or something. A lot of them literally like threw a rock, or they posted something on Facebook. And so even if you are somebody, and I'm not one of these people to be clear, but even if you are somebody that's like, well, they still shouldn't be violent, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, fine. You can stipulate that, and still there's thousands of people who are detained right now, including kids who have not done anything. And as you said, I mean, those are hostages.
Yeah, but the people who say that don't mean it. I mean, I wouldn't even dignify that question with an answer. I'd say, what does it matter if they're fighters? Don't you know that under international law, occupied people have the right to resist by any available means?
Yeah, I mean, trust me, I have a lot to say about that, and I've been thinking about the right way to communicate it. And I talked with a lot of people about October 7th and about Hamas and things like that. And I'll just sort of leave it for now at part of the idea behind this project is to help people see that, like, if you had to live under these conditions, at what point would you stop for your kid's safety? Like, where would the line be for you, and what you would or wouldn't do for your child to be able to live a decent life, or to survive, or to put food on your family's plate? And I think that if people understood what they were actually up against and what their peaceful protest has been met with, which is beatings and killings, I think that it illuminates the idea of armed resistance quite a bit.
Also, if you were under those conditions, at what point might you snap?
That's the other thing, is like, I mean, James Baldwin wrote a lot about how racism could, create brutality in both the racist and the person receiving the racism. And like, what does it do to somebody to be tormented and brutalized for their whole
Look at the
lives?
Nat,
Like, why would you
look at the Nat Turner Revolt, which we
exactly?
now hold up as sort of an example of freedom fighting. You know, they disemboweled babies. They cut babies out of their mothers. I mean, they did all the things that Hamas is accused of. They cut the heads off men, women, and children.
Yeah, no, I mean, these resistance movements become a lot more romantic with like a few decades. But I think that on that point, I just want to say one other thing actually. And again, like I'm not speaking for the whole West Bank, of course, but overwhelmingly, what I heard when I would talk to about October 7th, I mean, I heard a lot of things, but for starters, I didn't meet anybody who was celebrating uh, civilians being killed. That is not it. To the extent that they are celebrating, it's that finally they broke out of the cage and they delivered a blow to Israel, and now the entire world is seeing things differently. And undeniably, the conversation about Palestinians has changed since October 7th. And again, like you don't have to go nearly as far as like supporting Hamas, or you don't even have to support armed resistance to just like try to think about, if you were on that side of the fence, like why would you support armed resistance? And like a lot of, Hamas is a religious group, obviously. Like there's tons of secular people, and they are willing to support anybody who fights for them. And the PA doesn't fight for them. I mean, the PA is basically in the pocket of Israel, and so like they go with what they've got. And I mean, I've actually found that like a helpful parallel for people is certainly not a perfect parallel, but I think the O.J. Simpson case is interesting because after he was found not guilty, and white America was horrified and Black America was celebrating for the most part, white people were like, "Oh my God, they're celebrating a murderer." But actually, what they were celebrating was like a black guy beating the racist criminal justice system. And I think that people,
You got to watch out with that metaphor, because the act of violence itself, if he did it, wink, wink, uh, had nothing to do with sticking it to Whitey or
I know, but
avenging. You know,
do you think anybody was celebrating? Oh, he killed his wife. I mean, I think they were killing. He
no,
beat the criminal justice system.
I understand, but in this case,
Oh, everyone's saying bad comparison.
I mean,
Okay, we'll edit it out.
I'm just saying this. When I saw the Hamas fighters paragliding, yeah, the thumbs down from the crowd on this one. You're workshopping it. You're workshopping it before you take it on the road. When I saw the Hamas fighters don't worry, it's cool. Air paragliding over the fence. I didn't know what they were going to do. I heard that they had taken over military bases. I was like, "Fuck yes, this is incredible." And
It's my dog. Dorothy, relax.
he's like, "You stay away from my owner's metaphors."
What's that?
Like, you stop judging my
Yeah.
owner's metaphors.
No, I mean, I think another point about that is like, again, without having to endorse any specific thing that was done on October 7th, like people should keep in mind that those people, almost for the most part, who broke through had literally never been outside of the gates. And so they broke out of the gates, and there's like, you hear them in videos saying, "Oh my God, look at our land. Look at how fertile it is. Look at, there's a swimming pool over there." So like, I just think that, again, people should really just try to understand the conditions and what that could do to somebody, and to what lengths they would go to get out of them. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I take your point that unless you're inside a group's perspective, and unless you know what they've been through and really reckon with what would that be like for me, you have no right to judge their reactions to anything.
And that's why I think it's so difficult for a lot of Jewish people to face up to the actual brutality of the occupation, because once they do, then that leads them down the path that you're describing, which is once you understand how brutal it is, you understand what you would do to break out of that.
Right.
And I mean, yeah. So the like the strongest negative reaction I've gotten from people to what I've written and posted, honestly, it's mostly been like, I don't
Yeah.
want to look at it. I can't look at
Yeah.
it.
Well, that's honest.
Yeah.
Zionists could turn it around and say, well, unless you've lived in Israel, they love to say this to North American Jews, especially. You're over there and you're comfortable. I did a live with some guy, and he said, or I was reading an email from him, and he was like, you sit there in your Brooklyn Starbucks, and I said, excuse me, sir, I may be a cushy Brooklyn effete, you know,
You're not
urban
going to stop.
North American liberal Jew, but fuck you. I didn't move to Brooklyn to drink
Yeah.
Starbucks.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Exactly.
Hungry Ghost Coffee. I'm going to Stumptown. I'm getting my
Right.
artisanal lattes. But Israelis like to say that unless you live here, you can't know what we're up against. And, and then they say, well, what would you do if your daughters were raped and all the things that are accused? Uh, but let's go with the things that are 100% proven: murdered, abducted,
Mm-hmm.
brutalized, taken hostage. What would you do?
Yeah.
And part of the snarky part of me, and I think you and I have different styles, and I think that's good. We're like different characters in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship of the Anti-Zionist Jewish Ring, because your ability to just fucking go there and tell it like it is, I'm not doing that, but I'm over here kind of doing verbal smackdowns and just dissecting stuff. I say, well, first of all, if my daughter was taken hostage, I would say, stop bombing my daughter and find out what the hostage takers want and give it to them. That's what I would say. I've seen Die Hard. I've seen Dog Day Afternoon. I know
Mm.
how hostage situations work. That's number one. But besides that, it's like, it's one thing to say, yes, I can understand the Israeli desire for revenge and even destruction. Of course, I can understand it, because I understand that these people, A, are brainwashed and are fearful and are held hostage by their own government inside an ideological system that preys on and creates more terror and fear, right? And a hatred and distrust of the outside world. Uh, so I can understand that. And then when something bad happens to you, my brother made the point recently that it's not just uh, the trauma of the violence, but also the humiliation. That's not supposed to happen to us. A really bruised national ego. And I can understand the desire for revenge. A lot of Americans in the aftermath of 9/11 had that, but the government, who had other options, capitalized on it, took advantage of it, and did the thing they already wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, there's obviously been a lot of conversation lately about the Israeli public and like the activists there, and why are they only talking about the hostages? And I have a lot to say about that, but I will just say, purely from a self-interested perspective, like from their self-interest, like I think a lot of people have realized that this is not sustainable. Like, you cannot keep people caged like that, and a lot of them just don't force themselves to follow that thought to where it goes. But I do think that a lot of people realize this is not going away.
Yeah.
And there may be people who actually think we can kill all of them, including like Netanyahu. But yeah, I think that, yeah.
I don't think Netanyahu thinks that. I think he thinks he can keep this going to stay in power perpetually, and that's all he cares about. His only thing is about sustaining power. As I wrote in the lyrics of that parody song that I wrote with Katie Halper, when Netanyahu sings, "I'm so glad we're bombing. This war is super calming. A ceasefire would mean I'd be going to jail." I think that's
Yeah.
his. I think that's his motivation. But why don't we talk about it, since you brought it up? This uh, I didn't really follow it closely, but there was a big conflagration the other day
Yeah.
with the
Uh-huh.
BDS leadership, whatever that means. I'm never quite clear on what that means, like who elected them and whatnot. But choosing to like take a shot at standing together, Omdim
Yeah.
Biachad, or whatever it is in Arabic, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's one thing to say, I don't like standing together style. It's not radical enough for me. They're not talking enough about Zionism or apartheid or whatever, which actually, if you actually look, they are talking about equality and justice and freedom. But it's another thing to sort of say, you're not doing enough, therefore you're a sleeper agent for the way it is. And what, I, I, I just, I find it unfortunate.
Yeah. No.
I did a video about this back in December about the tendency to try to root out normalizers and all this stuff. It's not my place to tell how Palestinians how to do their work, but there's a hell of a lot. Oh my God, what is up with Instagram? What did I do
We
that
won. You
deserved those
freed
fireworks?
Palestine. You freed Palestine.
What is it?
I
It's
don't know.
crazy. They need to tell us the rules. Um, uh, what was I saying?
You're talking about no. You're talking about like what right do we have to say how we should
We
fight?
don't have the right, but I also can observe that there's lots of Palestinians inside standing together, and there's a lot of Palestinians who appreciate the people who are being labeled as normalizers. So, like, which Palestinians should we listen to?
Yeah. No, I want to say a few things about that. First of all, I agree. Like, I'm certainly not the authority, nor am I the one with skin in the game. So, everything I say is my personal opinion. You could take it or leave it. But okay, so first, I want to just say that there's no world where Palestine wins an all-out war against Israel. That anybody who thinks that they will win a pure fight is delusional. That will end in annihilation of the Palestinian people
Even
and
with
potentially World War.
even with Hezbollah in the mix.
Yeah, and potentially World War III if once Iran gets involved. So you follow that. Okay, so there has to be a political element.
Yeah,
There has to be.
yeah,
Um, Part of that political element has to take place in Israel
yeah,
because again, like Israel is a proxy for the United States and for all these other places. They're client states. So okay, so again, if we're talking practically here, it's like there has to be a movement inside of Israel for Palestine. And I think that people look at the public there and they are so taken aback by how brainwashed they are. And it's just easier to say they're hopeless.
yeah,
But even if you do think that, or if you think they're almost hopeless, there's no
yeah.
alternative. And so I just want to say to people that I mean I know some of the Standing Together people. I met with them, and I think that people should understand that like sometimes as an activist or an organization, like you have to try to build a coalition,
Yeah.
and you have to make certain messaging decisions, which is part of sort of moving people along a funnel of getting them to the place that you want them to be, which in this case is like ending the occupation and true equality. And so without getting into like the weeds of any positions of theirs or what BDS said, I will just say that I think that this sort of note, this like tendency to just be so trigger happy with anybody who says something that you don't like, it's easier to just take a beat and say, well, okay, like why are they doing this?
Right.
And like, is it helping the cause? And again, like people can make their own judgments, but I just think that to like go after a group based in Israel and say like they're being too nice to the Israeli people, basically, it's like, well, what's their alternative?
Yeah.
Like they're trying to change, they're trying to win hearts and minds,
Yeah.
so that they can ultimately get people to the right place. So, I mean, I've said a lot about how I mean, and like there are activists who I think are true normalizers. Like they actually, and to me, it's like the same as the people who, desperately wanted to get Trump back to office, get Trump out of office so that things could go back to the way they were, like the status quo, which was not working for the vast majority of the
Which is
country.
why Trump
And like those,
was elected.
exactly, and like those people should be, dealt with accordingly. But if there are people who just have a more sort of practical approach to this, but their views are in the right place, like again, like you said, Daniel, you don't have to agree with them, but like is it helpful to just throw them into the furnace?
Is there room in the movement that wants to stop a lot of different things, including the ceasefire? You know, of course you want Israelis to wake up to their own the suicidality of what Israel does. Of course you want Israelis to get alienated from their own government and start to question everything they say, and that has to start with hitting them on the pressure points, and it just happens to be the case that Palestinians are human beings too isn't a pressure point yet. There's too much of a
Yeah.
callus over that sensitive spot, and that is awful. And you can deplore it if you want, but anyone who thinks that talking to an Israeli is normalizing, or that by definition a group like Standing Together, because Jews and Palestinians get together and hug and feel love for each other. I mean, number one, you've never talked to an Israeli who really sees the truth. You've never talked to a true anti-Zionist Israeli, and you've never talked to an Israeli in a way that let you see that these are people too, and they're captives of a terrible system. I'm not saying forgive Israel at all. And you know what? If there was a pitched battle between Israel and Palestine, it'd be fucking horrible. It would be a bloodbath. But if I'm watching that movie, I know who I'm rooting for. I do.
Yeah, and you also know like what your odds are, which are very low. And again, I just want to encourage people who hear all this and they still think no, the whole country is irredeemable. What is the solution then that does not have a political element within Israel? And I think that there's no good option. And the last thing I want to say about this is just I met a lot of Palestinians activists who are wary of some of the activism they see in the Western world. Not all of it, of course. I mean, there people in general are thrilled at what they're seeing, but they do see some people that it seems like maybe this is more about you and
Yeah.
your own like what you think it says about you to take this militant position, and like don't forget that you're fighting for us. Like we want to have good lives. Like we want to have good lives. And is what you're doing help getting them closer to having a good life or not?
Yeah.
And so I think that's just a helpful thing to say.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing about something that has been much debated is anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism, obviously. And, you know, I honestly, this is another one of those things where going in, I expected, I'm probably going to hear some things I don't like about Jews.
I'm just turning my camera off for a second, but I'm listening.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm probably going to hear some things I don't like about Jews was what I was thinking. And I did not hear a single thing that was like remotely anti-Semitic, but also the way that the Palestinians explain why their problem is with Zionists and not with Jews, it's so clear. And, you know, it's not a novel argument, but when you hear it from the people with the skin in the game, it's just like, we only have a problem with the people who are oppressing us and killing us. Like, why would we have a problem with anybody else? And those people are the Zionists. And so, you know, a lot of people have said to me, "Oh, they're just telling you that because you know they know it's what you want to hear because you're Jewish." And like, okay, you can think that if you want. I mean, I'm not an idiot. I can read people, but like they walked me through it in detail. Like I had lots of deep, thoughtful conversations with people about their feelings towards Jewish people. And you know, to state the obvious, like the only thing that is would potentially make them turn them against Jewish people is people insisting over and over and over that Zionism and Judaism are the same thing. And so, like, you know, this is something that we've been saying for a long time, but it just put a fine point on it to hear it from the people who, and to be clear, like, they do hate the Zionists who oppress them. Like, that's very real. And anybody would hate them in that circumstance. But, like, it's a very practical thing. Like, why wouldn't I hate my oppressor? Why wouldn't I hate my enemy? And that's this country. It's not Jews. There's Jews everywhere. It's this country that's doing this to me. And
Go watch
yeah,
go watch Malcolm X's interviews when white, you know, concerned pundits or interviewers try to say to him, but Mr. X, you know, your rhetoric towards whites is hateful, and aren't you concerned that, you know, this concern trolling about this and that, and you know, Farrakhan too, has Louis Farrakhan, who, you know, Jews have a problem with, but has had some brilliant moments on the Donahue show and all that, where you just get to hear such an articulate refutation of that line of, it's like, how dare you even ask me that question? How
yeah,
condescending do you have to be, and how morally obtuse do you have to be to, and how dehumanized must you render me if you can't imagine yourself in my circumstance and get that hatred, you hate your oppression, so you hate your oppressor. Now, maybe you turn to Christianity and say, okay, I'm going to make this, I'm going to love them or whatever. But you don't expect that. You can't demand that of people, especially when you're not practicing it yourself.
Yeah, no, Mohammed El-Kurd has written a lot of great things about that. The activist whose home was taken in East Jerusalem. He has an article. It's like it's not it's something to the effect of it's not my fault that the people who stole my home are Jewish. Like I'm gonna hate them, and it's not my fault they're Jewish. If you think it's anti-Semitic for me to hate them, then like okay, that's on you. But like they stole my house, and I hate them, and they are Jewish. So if you want to connect those dots, be my guest. But I'm not doing it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What are people saying? Is there anything else I should cover?
They want to know what your name is.
Oh, my name's Jasper. Um,
You can
and
you can see his handle in so why don't you just go follow him if you're not
yeah,
following
and
him.
again, like, yeah, this is just going to be a shameless plug, but the first article that I wrote
I'd like
about this.
to see a shameful plug. I'd like to see a plug that's just like really ashamed,
Well, the
But
truth is, I do feel ashamed for this, but the first article that I wrote about the West Bank, I published it a couple weeks ago. If you go to my Substack, which is linked to my Instagram, the article is called "You Don't Understand How Bad It Is Here." The whole point of that article was to sort of shake people loose. People who know there's an occupation, they understand there's some bad things happening. They think that Netanyahu's bad, but they actually just have no idea what's going on, like on a day-to-day level. And in that article, I really tried to just make it as plain as possible. Like, this is what's happening. If you are a person of, any sort of dignity, then you should be against this. And yeah, it's kind of hard to argue with the facts that are laid out.
and you've got the evidence of your eyes and ears and your courage. So the link to your Substack is in your bio, is that right?
Yeah, and it's infinitejazz.substack.com, I think. Yeah.
With the underscore or not?
No, I just clicked the link in my bio. It's
Yeah, but
go to
exactly.
my Instagram handle. I think you can see it. It's infinite_JAZ, and then there's a link in my bio. Subscribe, find that newsletter. The last one I wrote is about the town of Sebastia. Yeah.
People, I think if people are wondering what they can do, you could make a list of all the people in your life who have either been silent or you think might be on the fence or who just keep bugging you from the Zionist side of things. And just say, read this. Just send them Jasper's work. Because really the facts are, and what you're great at, Jasper, I'm going to have to go here in a minute, but I just want to acknowledge you for your ability to speak calmly, reasonably, just the facts. You keep your cool in a way that I don't. Like, I like to provoke. I like to be kind of weird in the way I just, it's just a different shape of sword, But what you're doing is so clearly morally grounded, and someone said this conversation is easy on the ears and on the eyes, so that doesn't hurt either.
Yeah, I have my mother to thank for everything you just said.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to get booted off automatically
Okay.
when it turns 6:30. So thank you for this.
Yeah.
Yes, we will post this. Please share this with people, everyone, and let's get together here in person.
Let's do it. All right. Thanks, Daniel. Thank you, everybody, for watching and
Peace.
sharing.